Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and welcome to part 5 of our exploration of Asian horror films released in 2013. Now it's been a few months since I uploaded part 4 of this video. The main reason for this is that I wanted to finish and release my Death of J horror video, so I had to focus my time on that for a little while. And if you've not seen my Death of J horror video, I'm going to link it in the description box below. It's an 80-minute extravaganza that focuses on production trends in contemporary Japanese horror. And I think it will be informative for a lot of people out there. It's probably the best video that I'll ever do on this channel. Probably. So make sure that you watch it. Now this is the final part of this video, which explores 2013 in Asian horror, which means that we have reached my personal favorite Asian horror films from this particular year. And since I've already covered a bunch of interesting movies already in parts 2, 3, and 4, you might expect that the films to be showcased in part 5 will be particularly impressive, and you would be correct in that assumption. Now, as always, titles for all of the films that I discuss will be listed in the description box below, so let's get started here. And our first film tonight is called Rigor Mortis, a Hong Kong horror film, of course, from 2013. A public housing tenement is plunged into a dark storm of supernatural chaos. Our main protagonist is a rather gloomy fellow. His wife left him, and he has no desire to live anymore. So he attempts suicide, but gets possessed by twin ghosts while in the act. Now, luckily for him, a retired vampire hunter and exorcist comes to his rescue. But there are more nefarious dangers that will present themselves, like a deadly hopping Chinese vampire. So right from the start, this film has some surprisingly cool visuals and spooky atmosphere. I like the use of color in this movie, definitely one of the highlights of this. Now, unlike some of the older Hong Kong hopping vampire movies, and yes, there have been a bunch of them, this one takes itself seriously almost all of the time, and is even a bit mean-spirited in spots because it's more gruesome and bloody than I had expected going into it. And this has a mix of violence, ghostly events, and sorcery, sometimes in the same scene. Mystical elements in a modern setting is very cool to see. So, this is a contemporary set film, but it includes like old school mystical elements in it, which is pretty cool. Now, in terms of pacing, Rigor Mortis takes its time to set up the history of the apartment complex as well as the residents. And this also has a lot of cultural details, including spell casting, which makes the horror sequences feel different from those from other industries around the world. You will recognize this from the opening scene, which is rather creative. Now, this element helps to make this film very, distinctive compared to a lot of other horror films out there. Hong Kong definitely contributed a small handful of culturally significant and specific horror films in 2013. Now, we previously covered the Tales from the Dark films in part 4 of this video. So it's nice to see that Hong Kong, at least in some aspect, retains some of their culture in their films. Because it's something that people complain about, is that Hong Kong sometimes focuses on exporting films to the mainland a little bit too much, and it loses that cultural identity. But in 2013, we have a small handful of horror films that retain that identity, so that's a good thing. Some CGI effects are used at times, which, ranges from enjoyable to marginally distracting. Overall, I think it works because it's supplemented with physical effects and practical effects. The vampire does look sufficiently disgusting, I'll tell you that much. But one thing you should understand before going into this movie is that, the vampire itself does not show up until the second half of the film. Before that, we get two ghosts with like these red wires coming out of their bodies. Real interesting ghost design in this. A little bit odd, but quite entertaining. And I must say that I've never seen a Chinese vampire resurrected in the same way that's depicted in this movie. Or any vampire, for that matter. It's definitely a rather unorthodox aspect that I enjoyed in this, and I'm not going to spoil it for you. There are a few actors you may recognize. We have Su Ho Chin, who previously appeared in Mr. Vampire and Fist of Legend, and Kara Wei, Kara Wai, has a supporting role in this. I recently covered her in my review of Mrs. K, on this YouTube channel. Always nice to see some familiar faces in these films. Now, the very end of the film is a bit confusing and open-ended, which could throw some viewers off. Definitely not a traditional hopping vampire movie like the aforementioned Mr. Vampire film, which had like loads of hopping vampire shenanigans. You have to go into Rigor Mortis expecting a horror film that blends in, elements of different subgenres of horror together, and you'll probably like it if you go in expecting that. I know a bunch of people online who love this movie and consider it a contemporary classic. And finally, fun fact, Rigor Mortis was co-produced by Takashi Shimizu, the man who gave us the Ju-On franchise. I was kind of surprised when I read that. So yeah, this is one to watch. The availability of Rigor Mortis, it's widely available on DVD and Blu-ray with subtitles, and I think Netflix might have it streaming as well. All right, our next film tonight, we're going to hop on over to South Korea for Killer Toon. This is a horror thriller hybrid. A detective investigates a series of brutal murders that are inexplicably foreshadowed by a popular webcomic artist's drawings. So the premise of this movie is very interesting, because it's difficult to predict the cause of these bizarre events. Is someone stalking this webcomic artist and killing people in ways that mirror her works? And if so, how are they accomplishing this task in relation to when the comics are being published? I'm not going to tell you any details, but there's definitely an element of timing here that's quite difficult to figure out. Or is there perhaps an otherworldly explanation at play? You'll have to watch the film to find out. Now, what I will say is that I had fun attempting to figure this stuff out because it is a bit different from a typical mystery, and the ultimate explanation is nuanced and somewhat unpredictable, I think. In fact, the script of Killer Toon feels like this movie felt like an old school story to it that could have appeared in something like Creepshow or Tales from the Crypt. It just had that type of vibe to me. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was a comic book flair that's infused, or just the story and mystery components, or I don't know. It kind of has like this spooky, fun vibe to it at times that I really enjoyed. And it reminded me of stuff like that. Although it does morph into a conventional thriller at times as well, so be prepared for that. One of the most striking aspects of Killer Toon is the camera work, the framing of shots, and the presentation style. This is a very stylish film that's visually engaging. It's fun to watch. There are also numerous comic drawings that are spliced into the film, into the live action, which is pretty cool. You don't see that too often in films. I think it works really well in this, especially given that it mirrors the actual premise of the film. Now, the horror suspense sequences are actually rather lengthy, and there have a few nice kills on display, taking place in different settings and involving different kinds of phenomena. The lengthy morgue sequence is my personal favorite of the entire film. That's a really cool scene. There are a small handful of jump scares and fake-out dream sequences here and there that are peppered in, but not enough to be a problem. Si-Young Lee is our lead actress. I'm a big fan of her, as many of you know. Check out the romantic comedy Couples from 2011 for one of her best films. She's really good at expressionistic mannerisms and facial expressions, you know what I mean? Without going too over the top. She can express a lot of emotion with her face, and I like that about her. I'll watch her in anything. Dramatic elements are properly developed, and the ending is very different from what I was expecting. I don't know exactly what I was expecting, but it wasn't quite that. So I like the ending to this. Killer Toon overall, very cool flick, and I plan on rewatching it quite a bit in the future. It's in my collection. So check this one out as well. It is available on Region 3 DVD with subtitles. All right. We move on to another one here, another one that gets very good reviews online. A lot of the movies we're covering tonight have very good critical reviews to them, and this is one that is very critically beloved, and for good reason. It's very good stuff. And I'm talking, of course, about Greatful Dead. This is a Japanese horror drama film with some comedy spliced in. Now, our protagonist here is a young woman who is from a broken family. Her parents basically ignored her throughout her childhood. She would occasionally get into trouble for the sole purpose of earning their attention, but that didn't even work. Then her mother moved away and her father committed suicide. Now, consequently, our lonely protagonist becomes a stalker of other lonely people and eventually becomes obsessed with an elderly man. Now, this is a nicely crafted genre bender that becomes darker and more depraved as it moves along. It's deliberately paced but very interesting. And one reason for this is the infusion of black humor that I mentioned earlier. Most of this black humor is of the low-key variety. It's not too wacky, so it blends in really well with the horrific and dramatic elements. This director does a really good job of balancing these different components and genres together in this. The overall theme here is loneliness and isolation. I would say that the story flows freely, I would say, and it's not easy to predict where exactly it's going, based on the opening setup. That's a good thing. And this director is a man by the name of Eiji Uchida. He directed Topless from 2008 and Low Life Love from 2016, both dramas, both of which I liked. He also directed the recent film Love and Other Cults from 2017, which I plan on watching soon. It's been on my to-see list for a while. This guy is a very dramatic filmmaker who places his focus on his characters. And that certainly comes through in Grateful Dead because the lead character is very interesting to watch. Newcomer Kumi Takeuchi is impressive in the lead role in this. I've seen her in a few other films, but she served as an insignificant side character in those, so couldn't really get a good feel for her. But hopefully she gets more lead roles in the future at some point because she exhibited some legitimate acting chops in Grateful Dead. I loved her in this because she's required to play a character who's a bit off. She's losing it a little bit in this, and she knocks it out of the park with portraying her character just perfectly. Now, as an added bonus, we get the Korean actress Kopi Kim in a supporting role. She plays a Christian woman who attempts to convert the male lead to her religion. She previously started Midnight Ballad for Ghost Theater, which is one of my favorites. And then there's, of course, the veteran actor, Takashi Sasano, who has been in a ton of movies. He's the male lead in Grateful Dead, and he plays the extremely grumpy old man whose life gets turned upside down. It gets turned upside down. So given my descriptions of these characters, you might expect some interesting character interaction, and that's exactly what you get in this. Some horror films rely on atmosphere, gore, or suspense. Grateful Dead relies on its characters more so than a lot of horror films out there. So this is one to check out if you'd like, a good quality horror film. Definitely this is one to put on your to-see list. And Grateful Dead is available on Region 2 DVD and Blu-ray with subtitles. That's a UK release. All right. Our next one here. Oh boy. We got some memorable films tonight, man. Every film I'm talking about tonight is memorable. Oh dear. Moving back to South Korea here with Moebius. This is a South Korean exploitation, horror, drama, romance film. So this is one of those movies that has such an impactful opening sequence. I feel like I should not tell you what happens. And you know what? I'm not going to. What I will say is this. In a nutshell, this film is about a severely dysfunctional family unit that involves a mother, a father, and a teenage son. Now, the son is physically assaulted early on and must endure the emotional consequences of that experience. But the father and mother are also completely messed in the frickin' head. Add to this a sexy convenience store girl who looks very much like the mother, and this situation becomes a violent and sexually charged descent into insanity. I'm not going to mince words here. Moebius is a violent, disgusting, depraved, cringeworthy, and ridiculous film that some viewers may write off somewhat justifiably as worthless garbage. On the other hand, it's surprisingly and oddly engaging because it has impressive performances, interesting themes, and many surprises. Movies this nasty and provocative are generally low grade, with poor acting, directing, and script writing, but Moebius is an exception to that trend. It has top-notch direction, performances, and script writing, despite the fact that it's borderline reprehensible in its content. It's a bit of a rarity in cinema, right? Which automatically makes this worth watching. But why exactly is this film so offensive and nasty? Well, I'm no spoilers here, but what I will say is that there's a lot of emphasis on self-mutilation as a gateway for sexual pleasure. So think about that for a second. Just marinate on that for a second. Okay. Now, earlier in this Asian horror playlist, I covered the Hisayasu Sato film, Naked Blood, from 1996. Now, Moebius is not nearly as gory as that film. That film is historic in its gore. If you have not seen Naked Blood, check it out because it's historic in its gore. Moebius isn't on that level. But there are some similarities in terms of using pain to induce sexual arousal. And if I'm making comparisons to Naked Blood, fans of revolting cinema should pay attention. This one's up your alley. But that's not all, because Moebius also offers some extreme choices in presentation and style. There is no dialogue and no music at all for the entire runtime. And this is between, I think, the main characters specifically. But I'm trying to think. I haven't seen this film in a few years. I don't know if there's no dialogue between anyone or just between the main characters. But regardless, there's not much to hear in this in terms of dialogue. Very unconventional choice on the part of the filmmakers, but it should not be a complete surprise if you're familiar with the director, Ki-duk, who has previously directed films with minimal dialogue. So Moebius is definitely the nastiest film in Ki-duk's entire filmography, in my opinion, which is saying something. This film is just completely nuts. And to top it all off, there were a few genuinely funny moments in this. There are a few moments that I started laughing out loud, and it was intentionally funny. A bit off-key in its humor, though. There's one hilarious scene involving a truck that runs over something. And I'm not going to tell you what it runs over, because it's absurdly macabre, and you'll need to experience it for yourself. Fun fact, the same actress plays both the mother and the sexy convenience store lady, and I think it's important to understand when you're going into this, because it gives you a little bit of an idea of the psychological aspects of this. But yeah, Moebius, it's not for everyone. Moebius is not for everyone, but a lot of the interesting horror films are not for everyone, right? So if this sounded good to you, check it out. Widely available on DVD and Blu-ray with subtitles, in America at least. It's also on Amazon Prime, I believe. All right, our final 3 films this evening are all from Japan. They're all Japanese, baby. And there's some good stuff, some interesting stuff here. The next one is an obscure film that needs to be seen. And that is Pet Peeve, also known as Seeds of Anxiety. Now, a series of strange hauntings plague the residents of a strange suburban town. The focus shifts between a handful of characters and their experiences. First, you have a waiter at a little restaurant who witnesses a crazy event during the opening sequence and has difficulties with a ghostly customer. Second, we have a guy who hooks up with a hot girl who exhibits some strange behavior. And third, we have a family of 4 who experience some disturbing events within their new home. Now, right from the start of this film, you know that this film is going to be something very different. There's more creativity within the opening 20 minutes of this movie than most horror films have in their entire runtimes. The viewer really will be transported to this town that is inundated with inescapable otherworldly deaths and bizarre phenomena. The scare tactics in this film are strangely intoxicating. That's how I would describe them. And I believe Pet Peeve is one of the most creative, weird, unpredictable horror films in recent memory. It's really good. I mentioned in my recent Death of J horror video on this YouTube channel that some people like to complain that, all Japanese horror films are the same, but Pet Peeve is a perfect example of how a creepy, slow-paced Japanese horror film from 2013 can produce horror sequences that you've never seen before in your entire life. You know what I mean? On its surface, with my plot synopsis, you might be like, yeah, it sounds kind of similar to some other films that I've seen. But, yeah, this one's pretty different. It's pretty odd. And it's really, in terms of its style, it pounds the viewer with a very ominous mood that is occasionally relieved with what could be described as absurd spookiness. Things get very creepy at times in this, with a few bloody death scenes added to the mix. The appearances of the spirits are quite different, imaginative, and memorable. If you're worried about like a Sadako clone or an Onryo ghost like showing up and doing a crawl down some stairs, you're not going to get that here. There's some pretty odd freaking moments in this. Yeah, it's good stuff. Also, this has fantastic sound design. Really only one jump scare in this that I can think of, and it was a weird one. Definitely weird. Runtime is 87 minutes long. Very easy sit. Story's nicely written, and it ties the various plot lines together in an intricate and interesting manner. At first you're thinking this is almost like an anthology film. These are completely different stories, but they string together if you pay attention in interesting ways. And there's certain images that reference other events throughout the film. You might have to think a little bit at the end of the film to piece some things together, but that's what makes it cool. As an added bonus, some of the special effects are actually quite impressive in this. There's one near the very beginning I found to be quite convincing despite its outlandishness, and that special effect appears multiple times in the film. And it's not one that you see in many films, I'll tell you that much. So Pet Peeve is one of those like hidden gems that has gone completely under the radar. You almost never hear anyone talk about this. And there's a reason for that, as I will explain in a second. But now you know about it because you watched this video. So, now the availability of Pet Peeve is dicey. Okay, it's difficult to find. It's currently available on Cineflix, which is a subscription streaming site, which I have, a legitimate one. Keep checking YouTube, though, because the first time I saw this movie, it was on YouTube. It must have been with subtitles, but I think recently I found one without subs on YouTube, which you could probably make it through this without subs and still get an idea what's going on. But you are going to lose something there. So just keep checking, though. This is one it's worth seeking out. Somebody needs to release this on DVD with English subs at some point. Alright, next one. This is one I've seen a handful of times, and it just came out in 2013. And this one is called Cult, from Japan, of course. Now, 3 television personalities tag along with a psychic master who plans to perform an exorcism of a haunted house. Now, one positive thing about this movie is that it hits the ground running and does not waste any time. We have 3 beautiful protagonists who introduce themselves and then immediately have a funny conversation regarding spiritual and crazy and scary things. I think the ladies in this film are a bit endearing. I like them as characters. Then they watch a creepy video at the beginning of the film that a woman has recorded when she heard strange things in her house. Afterward, they quickly go out to the house where the strange events happened with a spiritual priest for the purposes of, really it's to make money, but they get in over their head. So this is another documentary-style horror film from Koji Shiraishi that carves out its own niche. I did I looked up some of the reviews of his films on Amazon Japan, just as I was skimming around, and a lot of his documentary-style horror films get pretty good reviews in Japan, from people who watch them. A lot of his reviews were rated like 4 out of 5 on Amazon Japan, 3.5 out of 5, so people really like his stuff. So I'm not alone in this opinion, thankfully. I really like this guy. And I think this is because Shiraishi includes phenomena in Cult that are too bizarre for a normal found footage horror film. And that makes things interesting, fun, and delightfully spooky. The entities here are reminiscent of the spiritual bugs found in the Mushishi films and anime series, if you've seen those, which are very unique. You don't see these types of things very often. A lot of films we're covering tonight are pretty memorable, man. This is another one. The ghostly entities are almost like little, like, bugs or like insects that like crawl around or like, fly around in the house. It's pretty cool. Now, these evil spiritual bugs infect human beings and can kill them fairly easily. I like the fact that it's less, these entities are less purposeful than like a ghost that haunts because of a grudge. But there's still a backstory to them that's explained during the latter half that is pretty cool. I liked it. Whatever's haunting this house or causing these problems in this house is quite formidable because these spiritual priests have serious difficulties with it. Scare tactics are of a nice variety. We get eerie background images that you may not notice until the movie replays the scene for you at times. I'm a huge fan of scares like this and have been ever since I saw Jewel and the Curse that was released in 2000. They keep you on your toes and they freak you out when you catch them without having to use jump scares or loud booms. And the characters will be walking or doing something in close to the camera, and then all of a sudden your eye will catch something in the back of the camera. You'll be like, oh man. You know what I mean? I love stuff like that. It's good stuff. Now, my favorite character makes his way into the film a little bit later during the second half. He's this young, kind of stylish, self-centered exorcist who's also an entertaining badass. You'll know when he shows up. Trust me. His chosen nickname also is quite hilarious. He provides a few brief bits of humor that round this one out. Runtime of Cult is 84 minutes long. And again, very nicely paced film that does not outstay its welcome. The ending of this film seems to set up a sequel that I don't think has been made yet, but I really hope that Koji Shiraishi returns to this franchise and makes another one, because I think there's a lot you could do with this. Now, sometimes in found footage horror films, the camera placement does not make sense. Fortunately, I think it does make sense in Cult. But there is one little plot hole that I found regarding it. The protagonist set up a camera, one of many cameras, outside of the house that they're investigating, but they don't really check the footage that often in the film. They don't check it every hour or every day. So the viewer is going to notice some things before the protagonists do. So, I don't know, if you might consider that like a little bit of a flaw, like, well, why didn't they check the footage immediately? You know what I mean? There might be a little bit of a flaw there. Also, the camera lady who's actually shooting on handheld misses a few of the background scares, which I guess is acceptable, because sometimes you'll miss them when they're not replayed. But if she did catch them, that could have assisted in the investigation. So there's little stuff like that. Not really big flaws, but I found this film to be extremely entertaining. So it didn't really bother me much. Cult is one of those movies that I rewatch on a regular basis. It's just something so purely entertaining that I like to watch it a lot. So this is one of my favorites from this year. And Cult is widely available on DVD in the United States. Alright, so we've come to my personal favorite Asian horror film from 2013, and it's one of my favorite Japanese horror films of all time. If you see my Death of Jay horror vid, you might know what's coming here. And that is Miss Zombie from Japan. Now, this film takes place in a reality where zombie infections have many different stages, and full-blown zombie infections take years to complete. Now, zombies with a low virus count are used as household servants, since they are relatively harmless if fed properly. Now, one such zombie woman is the focus of this story and serves as the primary protagonist. She's sold to a family as a domestic servant and is tasked with cleaning and other manual labor. But the dysfunctions within the family unit, as well as a tragic event, will make the situation spiral out of control. Now, this was directed by a man who calls himself Sabu. Now, this guy has directed a handful of very impressive films over the years, which include Postman Blues, Drive, Monday, Chasuke's Journey, and The Blessing Bell. But in my opinion, Miss Zombie is his best film. It's essentially an art house style film that plays with genre conventions and expectations. Now, as I just mentioned, the zombie is used as a protagonist that will quickly earn the viewer's sympathy through a referenced backstory, as well as the fact that she's constantly harassed and worse by the humans who have employed her. And there's also an interesting family dynamic involving the little boy that comes into play during the second half. Now, this film will surprise you with its dramatic impact, because it becomes emotionally resonant almost immediately. This film has a lot of heart to it. The filmmakers really care about the zombie woman protagonist, and consequently, I think the viewer will care for her as well. There's a lot of emotion that boils beneath the surface in this film, and that gives Miss Zombie its dramatic intensity. Now, the lead actress, Ayaka Komatsu, gives an outstanding silent performance. This is one of the best performances in a horror film in recent memory. She's that good in this. And she's forced to use like slight mannerisms and facial expressions to give the viewer an idea of what her character is thinking and feeling throughout the film. Now, in terms of visuals, this is very nicely shot in black and white, and natural sunlight is showcased very vividly throughout. This movie really looks fantastic. And the use of black and white color, the black and white color scheme makes sense, given the fact that this is essentially a silent film. There is one slow motion shot near the end of this film that I'm not going to spoil that is just phenomenal. It's so good. It's really good. And I mentioned that, I'm not going to say any more about it. I'll just stop there. Pacing in this film is slow. Okay, it's glacial. I'll say it's glacial. And there is some repetition in the zombie's daily routine in her cleaning duties, which could frustrate some viewers. This is not really a mainstream horror film. Like I said, it's kind of an art house flick. And it will probably be a little bit too slow and contemplative for most moviegoers, or a lot of moviegoers out there. But there is a lot of character development and story that is infused along the way if you're patient. You know, it's only 85 minutes long, so I actually think it's paced quite well. Now, in terms of horror, this film is disturbing on a psychological level. You know, and another surprising aspect is that the most disturbing content in this film is driven by human nature and the exploration of human nature. You know, this is not a shallow film with a bunch of zombies running around. You know, on the contrary, it uses the zombie epidemic to hold a mirror against humanity, and I think it's far more impactful and insightful than a lot of other zombie films out there that people think are very, I don't know, they have a lot of social commentary to them. I think Miss Zombie is better than some of them. I'll just leave it at that. And it's also, how can I say this? I would say Miss Zombie, if you want to keep up with contemporary Japanese horror, Miss Zombie is a must-watch. You have to watch this movie. It's in my top 5, probably my top 5 favorite Japanese horror films of all time, and it's actually better than a lot of the Japanese horror films that people like to talk about that came out during the late 90s and early 2000s. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So, yeah, this one, you have to watch it. And, you know, it's, this movie, it kind of annoys me, and I mentioned this in my Death of Jay horror video. You know, Miss Zombie is such a special film, and the fact that nobody really bothered to watch it, or even talk about it. Like, there's one other review on YouTube of this movie, I think. You know what I mean? It's ridiculous. You know, people need to keep up with the industry, because we all know that everybody has an opinion on Japanese horror films, but let's keep up with it. You gotta watch this movie, man. So, yes, I highly recommend it, and it's widely available on DVD in the United States. Check it out. Definitely deserving of the best Asian horror film of 2013, in my opinion. So, that concludes part 5 of our journey through Asian horror films released in 2013. And I gotta tell you, you know, looking back on it, 2013 was a damn good year for Asian horror. I mean, Japan released a bunch of interesting horror films, as usual, one of which I think is an all-time classic. South Korea, Hong Kong, and Thailand all had significant contributions. Heck, I mean, we even had one of the most purely entertaining, so bad it's good horror films in recent memory with The Crone, which I covered back in part 2 of this video. So there's a lot of entertainment value to be had from 2013 in Asian horror. And be sure to join me next time, because I'm going to crack into Asian horror films from 2014. Still a few films I need to watch before I do that, but it'll be coming. And can 2014 possibly be as good as 2013? Because 2013 was a good year. Now we're going to find out. And as always, I'll see you next time.